welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The hospital wing is too bright and too quiet, except for the tick of the clock on the far wall, drip of a potion bottle, the faint, uneven breath of a boy who almost lost everything again. Dumbledore's eyes glint behind his half-moon spectacles. 3 turns should do it, he murmurs, gaze flicking from Hermione to the time-turner at her throat. In canon, this is where her hand shoots out, where she grabs Harry without thinking and drags him into the loop. But tonight, she hesitates. Harry pushes himself up on his pillows, confusion written in every line of his face. Ron, pale and furious, grips his blankets until his knuckles go white. The air smells of antiseptic potions and singed fabric, of fear that hasn't quite faded. Somewhere, a curtain sways in a draft, whispering against its rail. Hermione's fingers close around the cool metal of the time-turner, and her heart is hammering loud enough to drown out the clock. What if she doesn't take Harry? What if she protects him by keeping him out of it? Just this once. What if she's the only one who remembers what really happened tonight? The only one who has to carry the weight of it? This isn't a story about Hermione being less brave. It's a story about what happens when the most responsible person in the room is handed the most dangerous kind of responsibility: time itself. Because she's already spent a year bending her days into impossible shapes, slipping from arithmancy to divination to ancient runes, trusting that McGonagall and the Ministry knew what they were doing. Because she has listened to every warning about being seen, every quiet implication that one wrong move could shatter the timeline. Harry swings his legs over the side of the bed. Hermione, what's he talking about? We have to go. Sirius Buckbeak. His voice breaks on the name. Ron scowls, frustrated and useless in his cast. If there's a way to fix it, don't stand there thinking, just do it. But Hermione is thinking of a werewolf under the moon, of a man everyone calls a murderer, chained and waiting for the kiss, of how many times tonight Harry almost died because he throws himself between danger and the people he loves. What if, for once, she doesn't let him? This changes everything, not because Harry is less central to the story, but because Hermione chooses to step into the fracture alone. She swallows, forces a shaky smile. "I'll be right back," she lies, and only Dumbledore seems to hear the tremor. Then she steps back, slips behind a curtain that smells of starch and sleeping draughts. And in that small, hidden space, she lifts the chain over her head. No witnesses, no shared glance, no hand on her arm. 1, 2, 3 turns. The world lurches and blurs and spins away, leaving a single witch in the center of a widening crack in time. If Hermione learns she can move through nights without anyone seeing, how many will she quietly rewrite before someone notices the seams? How many versions of this story will exist only in her memory? So, let's explore what it means when the timeline belongs, first, to her. Rewriting one night, the premise and the price. Hermione stands in the hospital wing, with 3 turns of a chain biting into her palm, and realizes something terrifying. No one has actually told her she has to bring Harry. In canon, that moment collapses into a partnership. Dumbledore's vague instructions somehow become effortlessly Harry and Hermione side by side in a stable loop where everything they change has, in a neat paradox, already happened. The Rock at Hagrid's, the Patronus at the lake, Buckbeak and Sirius flying free. The timeline protects itself because the trio together only ever complete what was always meant to be. But what if Hermione hears the same words and understands them differently? What if, this time, 3 turns should do it sounds less like a plan and more like a test? Dumbledore does not say, "Take Harry with you." He does not say, "Tell Mr. Weasley." He looks at a 13-year-old Muggle-born girl the Ministry already mistrusts and asks her to decide who goes back, who is told, who carries the blame if it all goes wrong. This changes everything, not because Hermione suddenly has more raw power than in canon, but because that power is unshared, unspoken, and unverified by anyone else's judgment. She looks at Harry, pale and shaking after Dementors and werewolves, and the revelation of his godfather. She remembers that he is hunted, that he walks the corridors of Hogwarts with a murderer's name on his back and a prophecy-shaped target he doesn't even know about. And she decides that pulling him into a second round of danger, into the teeth of time magic, is one risk too many. So she goes alone. This isn't a story about wish fulfillment, where Hermione levels up and the narrative politely rearranges itself around her competence. It's a story where more power means more isolation, where every extra hour she steals from the night is another hour she can't explain to Harry or Ron without admitting she has broken rules that could get her expelled, prosecuted, or quietly disappeared into some ministry office that collects misused artifacts and the people who touched them. Because here's the other axis of danger. She is a Muggle-born child holding a heavily regulated device on loan from a government that barely trusts her existence, let alone her judgment. One visible misstep, being seen twice, contradicting a professor, being in the wrong corridor when something explodes. And it's not just detention. It's hearings, snapped wands, Azkaban whispered in the corridors. It's her parents, who do not even know magic has a department of mysteries, suddenly learning that their daughter is an unspeakable's case file. So when she slips back those 3 hours alone, the ethical stakes twist. Does she save Buckbeak because it's right? Or because she can't bear to watch Hagrid cry again? Does she free Sirius because he is innocent? Or because she cannot stand the version of Harry who walks away from that lake believing he failed his father's best friend? When only one person remembers the previous outcome, whose feelings define fixing the night. And once she learns, she can nudge reality without witnesses. How long before she starts quietly correcting more than one night? A missed class here, a near-fatal Quidditch fall there, a conversation replayed until Ron doesn't say the thing that hurt. If the brightest witch of her age discovers she can sand down the rough edges of growing up, does she even notice when protecting her family from pain turns into deciding which pains are permissible? So, let's explore the price of that decision, because the moment Hermione walks back alone, the question is no longer whether time can be changed. It's how many times she will dare to change it before someone realizes their memories don't quite match hers, and what happens when the first person to notice is not Harry, but Dumbledore. From homework to history, reframing Hermione's time turner. Hermione doesn't start with destiny in her hands. She starts with a timetable. In canon, the time turner is almost a punchline. Hermione Granger, the girl who loves homework so much she bends the laws of physics to take more classes. She is overloaded, overscheduled, walking through third year with ink on her fingers and shadows under her eyes, using time travel as an academic tool. Go to arithmancy, spin. Go to divination, spin. Go to ancient runes. Repeat. It's impressive. It's also small, contained, safe as far as time can ever be safe. But what if that isn't where she stops? What if the moment she goes back alone, that neat timetable quietly mutates into a battlefield map? Because this Hermione, our AU Hermione, doesn't just see extra hours as a way to stay ahead of homework. She starts to see them as a way to stay ahead of catastrophe. The time turner becomes an emergency lever, a moral obligation hanging around her neck. If you could have gone back to fix something and you didn't, are you responsible for what happened? That question will keep a 13-year-old awake much longer than OLL revision ever could. Psychologically, it makes terrible, perfect sense. Hermione's deepest fear has never really been trolls or werewolves. It's failure. It's being wrong when it matters. Add in her muggle-born outsider status, always one misstep away from being told she doesn't belong, and control over time starts to feel less like a privilege and more like the only way to protect the fragile safety she's found. Everyone else is growing up. Hermione is trying to stay one turn ahead of disaster. This changes everything about how we read her heroism. In canon, courage often erupts from chaos and deprivation. Harry flinging himself in front of curses because he has never truly believed his own life has weight. This Harry is shaped by family and love. Hermione, by contrast, is shaped by over-responsibility. She doesn't leap because there's nothing to lose. She intervenes because she has decided, very quietly, that she is the person who must not drop the thread of the timeline. Love and loyalty in that frame twist into something sharper. She would rather risk paradox and madness than stand by while Harry, or Ron, or even Buckbeak suffers if she could have stopped it. Watch how that plays out. A missed Quidditch practice becomes an avoidable injury. A harsh Snape comment becomes a preventable spiral. A lost hour becomes a second chance she cannot bear to waste. Protect first, question later. And with every turn, Hermione's sense of self is rewritten. Is she a student, dutifully following McGonagall's rules, a friend, quietly cheating the clock so the people she loves make it through the year? Or is she the secret architect of everyone else's safety, the unseen hand that nudges fate back on course? This isn't a story about homework anymore. It's a story about a girl who starts to believe that if she ever stops spinning that hourglass, the whole fragile world of Hogwarts might crack. So, let's explore what happens the first time she proves herself right and realizes she can never unknow that power. A timeline in her hands, roadmap of a time-warped Hogwarts. So from that moment in the hospital wing, we're holding our breath with her. Because once Hermione proves time will bend if she pushes hard enough, the entire series becomes a different map. This isn't a story about one wild night and a saved hippogriff anymore. It's a story about a girl who quietly realizes every year at Hogwarts is now a test of how far she's willing to go. So, let's explore that roadmap. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the first fracture is Buckbeak and Sirius. Canon gives us one loop, one clean rescue, one daring flight. Here, Hermione has already gone back once alone, already watched Harry nearly die by the lake, already seen how close everything came to failing. When Lupin transforms, when Pettigrew escapes, when the Dementors close in, she doesn't just react. She anticipates. Maybe she angles them away from the Hooming Willow 5 minutes earlier. Maybe she accidentally delays Snape so he never reaches the Shrieking Shack at all. Small nudges, different bruises, a slightly less broken Sirius, and a Hermione who's tasted what it means to preempt disaster. This changes everything for Goblet of Fire. The Triwizard Maze, the Yule Ball, the second task, each is now shadowed by a girl who knows that time can be stretched. When Harry's name comes out of the goblet, does she really wait for Moody to explain? Or does a future-savvy Hermione slip Crumb a warning, plant a note near the goblet weeks earlier, or make sure Harry never reaches that particular graveyard alone? Maybe Cedric doesn't die in this timeline. Maybe someone else does. Because saving one boy in a graveyard means someone else has to stand in his place. And Hermione is the only one who remembers that original body on the grass. By order of the Phoenix, the relationship map is visibly skewed. Harry is still the chosen one, but to Hermione, he's also the friend she is determined to protect before he ever needs to be brave. She is the quiet strategist, steering DA meetings away from catastrophe, intercepting Umbridge's worst punishments with oddly prescient interventions. Ron feels it. The secrets, the way plans, seem half-made before he arrives. He's not a co-conspirator anymore. He's the one catching up, realizing there are versions of events he never lived. And when the Ministry battle comes, imagine a Hermione who has already rehearsed disaster. Maybe Neville doesn't shatter his nose this time. Maybe Sirius never reaches the Veil because she has spent months preventing the vision that lured Harry there in the first place. Or, pattern interrupt. What if her interference makes it worse? What if a different Godfather, a different Weasley, falls instead? From Half-Blood Prince into Deathly Hallows, those early, small changes compound. A Ministry that never loses Sirius Black in that same way tells a different story about Voldemort's return. A Triwizard tournament that doesn't end with Cedric's death shifts public outrage, shifts Fudge's denial, shifts which laws get written and which never do. When the Horcrux hunt begins, we're following a Hermione who has been living with invisible scars since 13, who has spent years triaging timelines in her head. This isn't a story about making the war easier. It's about a war fought on two fronts, against Voldemort and against the temptation to rewind every loss. And as we walk year by year through this altered Hogwarts, we'll watch how each decision to twist the hourglass doesn't just save lives. It fractures trust, rewrites prophecy, and forces Hermione Granger to decide how much of reality she's willing to sacrifice to keep her family alive. The hidden costs of playing with time. But time travel isn't free, and Hermione is the only one who really understands the bill that's coming due. Canon gives us warnings, but they're neat, almost academic. McGonagall's clipped voice in her office. Don't be seen. Don't meddle. Don't tell. The Ministry's control is absolute. This isn't a toy. It's a regulated weapon. In our altered timeline, Hermione doesn't just bend those rules by taking too many classes. She snaps them quietly, one mission at a time. She goes back without Harry, without Wonnets, and every solo turn of the hourglass is another step away from the safety rails McGonagall tried to build. Physically, it shows first. At 13, she's already exhausted from double arithmancy and ancient runes. Now add secret replays of Hogsmeade weekends, extra passes through the Buckbeak execution day, a second private loop of the night Sirius escapes. Sleep stops being a straight line. She naps between timelines. She wakes up unsure which version of Transfiguration she's already sat through. Temporal jet lag means she's nauseous at breakfast, because for her, it's actually the third time she's watched the porridge appear. This isn't a story about a clever study hack. It's a story about a girl whose body is living more hours than the calendar says she should. And then there's the disorientation that doesn't show on a timetable. When you've watched the same stone skip across the Black Lake 3 different ways, which memory is real? When you've seen Ron break his ankle in one loop and walk away laughing in another, which version of him are you reacting to in the corridor? Hermione's sense of now phrase. The present becomes a draft, not a fact. This changes everything about how she moves through Hogwarts, because she's never entirely sure which mistakes have already been fixed and which are still waiting to happen. Socially and politically, the risks sharpen. She is a Muggle-born girl trusted with a Ministry artifact in a school where people whisper the word mudblood. Any irregularity, an odd attendance record, a corridor sighting that makes no sense, a spell she shouldn't know yet, can be turned into a weapon. Snape's narrowed eyes over a cauldron, Fudge's bureaucratic panic, Umbridge's saccharine cruelty later on. All of them would pounce on evidence that Hermione Granger has been tampering with time. Because if a Muggle-born can rewrite outcomes, what does that mean for who gets to control the story? Morally, it gets darker still. Each secret intervention is technically illegal. She's altering outcomes without consent. Nudging people away from injuries, away from detentions, away from deaths they never knew were scheduled. Her motives are protective, almost painfully selfless. This family she's found in Harry, in Ron, in the Weasleys, is worth any risk. But because she can fix things, she starts to believe she must. Where is the line between protecting the people you love and deciding you know better than they do what their lives should be? So, let's explore the question that begins to haunt her more than any time-turner headache. What counts as enough? Is a broken arm worth a rewind? A ruined Quidditch match? A lost house elf? A silenced victim? A dead classmate? At what point does Hermione look at the hourglass, weigh one more fracture in reality against one more preventable injustice, and decide that this injury, this death, this betrayal is the moment she's willing to break the world for? And when that moment finally comes, whose fate is she holding in her hands? Why Hermione goes back alone. Fear, trust, and control. In that suspended heartbeat between choice and catastrophe, Hermione's fingers tighten on the chain. She could run to Harry and Ron. She could shout, explain, drag them into the spinning sand with her. So why doesn't she? Because in her head, this isn't a story about 3 friends breaking time together. It's a story about one person stepping between the people she loves and a danger they don't even understand yet. And in Hermione's private mental ledger, Harry is always already overdrawn. Look at how she sees him. Brave, to the point of self-erasure. Reckless, because he was never taught that his life has value outside of prophecy and war. Traumatized, even in third year, by dementors that claw through every thin layer of coping he's managed to build. Canon Harry throws himself at problems because no one ever protected him properly. This Harry is already carrying the weight of being the one Voldemort tried to kill and failed, even before he knows the wording of the prophecy. So when Hermione touches the time turner, her first instinct isn't, Harry will help. It's, Harry deserves one night where he doesn't have to save anyone. And Ron? Hermione knows his heart as well as she knows his homework habits. Loyal to the bone. Impulsive in the moment. Easily bruised by being left out. Especially when it comes to Harry. She has watched him flinch at being overshadowed. Watched him burn with shame when he thinks he's the weak link. Involving Ron in time travel means risking that impulsiveness in a space where one wrong move doesn't just lose you house points. It fractures reality. It also means giving him one more chance to blame himself if anything goes wrong. She can't bear that. So she makes the choice that will hurt him in a different way. She doesn't invite him at all. Underneath those personal calculations sits something older, her Muggle upbringing. Hermione comes from a world where rules and systems are designed, at least in theory, to protect you. Seatbelts, fire drills, exam regulations. If you have the training and the tool, you follow the protocol. McGonagall handed her the time turner with ministry paperwork and grave warnings. To Hermione, that means someone has decided she is the designated responsible party. If she has the knowledge, she must be the one to use it correctly. This changes everything about how she frames the risk. Not, should we do this, but I am the one who must do this safely. And she has learned over and over that adults don't always fix the disaster in time. A troll in the girls' bathroom, where 3 first years are the first line of defense. A polyjuice catastrophe that leaves her in the hospital wing, punished not for breaking rules, but for trying to uncover a truth no one else seemed urgent about. A basilisk roaming the school while teachers reassure and investigate and still fail to stop children from being petrified. What if those memories have taught her that waiting for permission means someone gets hurt? That sometimes the only people who protect students are other students? So when the moment comes, her choice to go back alone is a fusion of love and control. Love, because she is trying to shield Harry and Ron from both physical danger and the moral weight of rewriting time. Control, because she trusts her own judgment more than anyone else's when it comes to paradoxes and timelines. But because she steps into that loop by herself, she also steps into a kind of isolation that no time turner can unwind. She will remember the versions of events they never see. She will carry the secret of what almost happened. And that raises a quieter, more dangerous question. Once Hermione has proof that she can fix the world alone, how easy is it to ever hand that power back? First experiments, Buckbeak, the execution, and tiny edits. The first time she tests it, she goes back to the worst sound she remembers. The thunk of an axe, the rustle of wings, Hagrid's sob that doesn't belong in any world where justice exists. What if, she thinks, that sound doesn't have to happen? What if the timeline is less a law and more a suggestion? This isn't a story about Harry yanking her into motion in the hospital wing. This is Hermione alone, fingers tight around the time turner, choosing the execution day on purpose. She lands behind Hagrid's pumpkin patch, heart hammering, and immediately sees herself and Harry in the distance, walking toward the hut for that doomed farewell visit. It's a strange, disorienting double vision. Her body in the shadows, her own hair frizzing in the wind 20 yards away. How close can she get before she breaks everything? What happens if past Hermione hears a twig snap and looks back? McGonagall's warning rings in her ears, but the Ministry's abstract threats feel very small next to Buckbeak's very real neck on the block. So she edges closer, 10 paces, 5, close enough to hear her own voice arguing about appeals and precedents through the hut wall, and close enough to see that it doesn't matter. Her first interventions are tiny, almost petty. She rustles the trees at the forest edge, just as Fudge and the execution party approach, trying to pull his attention away, to make him pause, misplace a form, misread the time. She loosens Buckbeak's chains with a whispered charm 5 minutes earlier than canon, fingers shaking as the metal softens and slackens. She slips into the hut the moment Hagrid lumbers out to meet them and nudges a parchment to the floor, smears a signature with the edge of her sleeve, and then she retreats and watches, because she has to know what she learns is cruel and precise. Some events snap back into place as if the world is on a track. The signatures are still recognized. The officials still arrive. Hagrid still pours the drinks with trembling hands. The axe still falls. But because she was there, because she interfered, the timing is off by seconds. The executioner hesitates, wipes his blade, glances toward the forest when a delayed rustle reaches him. The swing lands a breath later than it did the first time she lived it. This changes everything, and also, infuriatingly, not enough. It means time isn't a blank page. It's a text that will tolerate margin notes, but not a different ending. She can nudge, not rewrite. She can protect a moment, not a whole day. Emotionally, it's devastating. Hermione has built her growing up on the belief that enough effort, enough cleverness, enough reading will fix any problem. Here, effort becomes a loop. She goes back again, and each time the universe concedes inches, but refuses miles. Buckbeak can vanish a fraction sooner. The axe can bite clean air, but someone still thinks a creature died. Someone still signs a form. Standing alone after one of those loops, mud on her shoes and feathers, still clinging to her robes, she stares down at the time turner in her palm. If she can save a hippogriff by learning where the timeline bends and where it breaks, what else might be possible? A godfather in a cave, a teacher in a tower, a friend on a battlefield. And once you know the exact second an axe can be persuaded to miss, how long before you start wondering whose death exactly you're willing to argue with next? The night of the werewolf, one girl, 2 moons. The second time the night unravels, Hermione is ready for the axe. She is not ready for the howl. Buckbeak has already been saved in this new loop. Feathers ruffled but neck intact, hidden in the trees because a 13-year-old girl dared to argue with time. That alone would be enough for most people. One life redirected, one injustice postponed. But because Hermione Granger has stood in a courtyard and watched a man be dragged away for a crime he didn't commit, enough is no longer a word that means anything. So she runs up through the tunnel into the shrieking shack, heart pounding with the queasy déjà vu of a timeline she has already watched once. The shouting, the wand work, the revelation of Scabbers. Canon has trained us to expect Harry at the center of this storm. But this isn't a story about Harry's sudden understanding of his parents' friend. This is a story about the girl who already knows how this night ends and is quietly, desperately rewriting it in real time. She positions herself differently. That's the first change. Instead of hovering at Harry's shoulder, she edges closer to Snape when he bursts in, face white with fury and fear. She's seen him stunned before, seen his body crumple and his chance to understand slip away. This time, when Sirius and Harry raise their wands, Hermione moves first. A precise, whispered Expelliarmus at Snape's wrist, not his chest, sends his wand skittering, but leaves him conscious, pinned by ropes a moment later, forced to listen. This changes everything, not because Snape suddenly forgives Sirius, but because he hears, clearly, the whole awful story. Peter's betrayal, the Fidelius, the street full of bodies. He watches the rat transform. He sees Sirius lower his wand rather than kill. When Lupin's muscles begin to tremble and his voice frays at the edges, Snape is looking at a colleague, not a childhood monster. And then the moon rises. Here is where the absence of Harry's future Patronus rips the script apart. Hermione has no stag to pin her hopes on, no memory of blinding silver flooding the lake. What she has is a wand, a time-turner burning against her ribs, and an almost painful inventory of who gets hurt if she does nothing. This Harry who grew up in a house where family means you never leave anyone behind, is already stepping between Wolf and Godfather. Hermione beats him to it. She shoves Harry sideways, takes his place, and throws every defensive charm she knows. Impedimenta, reducto at a fallen tree, even a shaky expecto patronum that produces only a thin, silvery mist. It's not enough to stop Lupin, but it is enough to slow him, to change his angle, to send him crashing not toward the children, but toward the bound potions master. Pattern interrupt. In one version of this night, Snape is the unconscious hero dragged from danger. In this one, he's wide awake, staring down a werewolf he has dreaded for decades. And he sees, unmistakably, Hermione's body between Lupin and the students, Sirius dragging Ron back, Harry yanking at her sleeve. Dumbledore arrives minutes later than before, drawn by magic that doesn't quite match the original timeline. He finds a shack that tells a different story. Pettigrew gone, Snape bruised, but alive, Hermione shaking with the aftershock of spells cast too quickly. Sirius is still wanted. Lupin is still dangerous. But because one girl moved 3 steps to the left, there are witnesses now, confused, angry, undeniable. Has she done enough to free Sirius? Or has she simply shifted the blame, painting new targets on new backs? As the time-turner cools against her skin, Hermione realizes she has traded one fixed future for a tangle of maybes, and the night of the werewolf is only the beginning of what she's willing to risk. Sirius's escape, rewritten, a godfather in the margins. Hermione is already moving, when the first scream echoes across the grounds. She knows this sound. She knows what follows. The temperature plummeting, the way breath turns to knives in your lungs. The way Harry crumples by the lake, reaching for a stag that never quite arrives in time. But because she's alone in the loop now, no hand to grab, no whispered plan to follow, she has to decide how much of this night is she willing to rewrite with her own two hands. Canon gives us that perfect, closed circle. Harry seeing his own Patronus, Sirius saved by a rescue that was always meant to be. This isn't a story about that kind of certainty anymore. This is a story about a 13-year-old girl on the ridge above the lake, watching two timelines overlay each other and choosing which one gets to win. From her vantage point, Hermione can see everything at once. The struggling figures by the water, the black cloud of Dementors sweeping closer, the distant flicker of Lupin's silhouette as the moon drags him toward the forest. In the original timeline, she waits. She trusts that Harry's Patronus will blaze out at the last possible second. Here, alone, she doesn't have that faith to lean on. She has calculations. What if, instead of banking everything on Harry's untrained magic, she treats the scene like an exam question with too many variables? She could sprint for Hagrid's, rousing him sooner, sending a half-giant barreling toward the lake. She could conjure bluebell flames in a roaring ring, not to drive off Dementors. They don't fear fire, but to create noise and light. A distraction to pull Lupin's transformed attention away from three children and toward the chaos at the shore. Maybe she does both. Maybe this Hermione, this Harry's future general, layers her interventions. A thrown stone at just the right moment to make past Hermione look up and drag Harry a step further from the waterline. A timed scream that makes Snape hurry faster, his billowing robes arriving seconds earlier, his shielding spells catching more of the Dementors' first wave. She can't banish them all, but she can blunt the worst of it. Position herself so that when Harry falls, he falls behind a teacher's outstretched arm instead of in their direct path. And Sirius, the tower is different too. When she unlocks his door, she doesn't only say, "You have to go." Time travel has already broken once for her. The secrecy feels less sacred now. She presses a folded scrap of parchment into his palm, ink still drying, coded in references only a marauder would unpack. Stag and wolf, rat and snake. A war that never really ended. It isn't a prophecy. It's a warning and a promise. Harry is loved. Harry is not alone. And the fight is coming back. This changes everything for Sirius. A clearer explanation of what she's done, of how many tiny cuts she's already made in the fabric of the night, means he doesn't leave Azkaban's shadow thinking he's nothing but a hunted dog. He escapes on Buckbeak with the knowledge that someone in this timeline is already strategizing 3 moves ahead, already thinking about the next war, already planning how to protect Harry's makeshift family before Voldemort even has a body again. A less shattered Sirius warned that the Ministry will fail Harry, might write sooner in Goblet of Fire, argue harder against Dumbledore's secrecy, refuse to sit quietly in Grimmauld Place while the Order sidelines him. He's still in hiding, yes, but hiding with intent, not despair. The difference between those two stances. It means when he looks at Harry in the fire, he's not just seeing James's eyes. He's seeing a battle plan. And yet, when Buckbeak's wings beat the air and the black dog clings to his neck, Hermione is alone on the tower. No Harry, no Dumbledore, no shared impossible secret. Only her, the wind, and the thin line of the horizon where Sirius vanishes into a future she has quietly edited. No one else will remember the first version of this night, the one where the Patronus was late, where the terror cut deeper. No one else will know that Sirius's new resolve is built on a message from a girl who technically hasn't lived those later years yet. As the sky swallows Buckbeak, Hermione understands that she is now the sole archivist of discarded timelines, the only witness to what might have been. How long can someone carry that alone before the temptation to change just one more moment becomes impossible to resist? Living double, the slow erosion of Hermione's present. Hermione doesn't break all at once. She frays, and in the weeks after that night with Buckbeak and Sirius, the first threads begin to show. Clocks become enemies, not because they're loud or ominous, but because every ticking second is now double exposed in her mind. In the common room, she startles when the grandfather clock chimes, hand flying to her neck, as if the time turner is still there. In Transfiguration, she answers McGonagall's question, a heartbeat too early, replying to a version of the lesson only she remembers. Ron blinks, quill halfway to the parchment. She hadn't asked yet, he mutters. Hermione flushes, but she can't explain that. For her, she's already lived this question once. This isn't a story about a clever girl managing an overfull timetable. It's a story about what happens when your internal calendar no longer matches anyone else's. Hermione starts collecting ghosts of conversations that technically never happened. The time she let Harry storm out of the hospital wing before deciding on the second pass to stop him. The first iteration of a corridor argument where Ron snapped something he later didn't say because she engineered a different path. In her memory, both arguments exist. On the official timeline, only one does. So we see a subtle dissociation creep in. She'll hesitate mid-sentence, chasing which version of a moment actually survived. She remembers a bruise on Harry's arm from a misfired curse that in this edited sequence of events never lands. She can recall the metallic taste of fear from watching Lupin transform too close from a loop where she didn't quite get them away fast enough. Those injuries, those failures, have been erased. They still hurt. This changes everything about how she sits with Harry and Ron. Canon gives us a trio forged by shared danger. Here, Hermione has lived dangers they never even knew were options. She becomes more cautious, sometimes strangely distant, because she's seen the branch where Ron didn't make it to the Shrieking Shack, or the one where Harry hesitated a fraction too long and Pettigrew got away sooner. When they laugh about that mad night over pumpkin juice, she smiles, but there's a private inventory running behind her eyes. The versions of them she lost to keep these versions alive. And the time turner doesn't vanish from her life. McGonagall still expects her in arithmancy and ancient runes. The Ministry still pretends this is about academic opportunity, not weaponizing a child. But because Hermione has used those extra hours to save a man's life, every new turn for homework is tainted. Sitting in a double-booked afternoon, copying star charts in one loop and practicing wand movements in another, she can't stop thinking. This hour could have been used to prevent some other hurt. How do you justify spending borrowed time on essays when you've proven you can use it to rewrite fate? Which leads us to a chilling question the narrative never asks out loud. If Hermione has quietly lived more hours than anyone else in her year, is she still 13 in any meaningful sense? Or is she something older and lonelier, compressed into a third year's body? Growing up usually means accumulating experience alongside your peers at roughly the same pace. Here, she's lapping them, emotionally jet-lagged in her own life. What if the real cost of protecting her family isn't physical danger, but being the only one who remembers just how many times they almost died? And once you've crossed that line once, how long before the temptation to turn back the clock for smaller, more personal reasons starts to whisper at her again? The secret cracks when Harry and Ron notice something's wrong. So from the outside, nothing explodes. No dramatic duel, no visible crack in time. The first fractures in the Golden Trio are small, almost petty, which is exactly what makes them dangerous. It starts with Hermione being in the wrong place at the right time a little too often. She just happens to drag Harry and Ron down a side staircase seconds before Filch rounds the corner. She insists they leave the common room early, and then there's a sudden commotion as Peeves drops ink all over the armchairs they'd been using. She knows when McGonagall is about to patrol the third-floor corridor, and when Snape will be in a foul enough mood to confiscate anything fun. Once is luck. Twice is good instincts. The fifth or sixth time, you start to wonder. Ron is the one who says it out loud. Because of course he is. He jokes in the dormitory that Hermione is everywhere at once, that she must have cloned herself to keep up with all her classes, and still manage to show up right before they get into trouble. Everyone laughs, including Harry. But Ron doesn't. Not really. Underneath the teasing, there's a real question. When did their best friend start living a life they're not invited into? This isn't a story about Ron being petty for the sake of it. Growing up in a house where you're always the one with hand-me-downs means you recognize when someone is keeping the good jumper for themselves. Hermione's new secret rhythm of days feels like that. She appears exhausted at breakfast, eyes ringed with shadows, then spends the afternoon answering questions with crisp, perfect precision. Ron watches her flinch at a minor Quidditch bruise on Harry's arm, as if she's seen bones shatter there. He catches her staring at Harry during meals with this strange, relieved grief, as if she's already watched him nearly die and is still coming down from it. Harry can't name it, but he feels the distance. This Harry who has grown up in a family that reads moods the way other people read newspapers, knows when someone is carrying something alone. Hermione's smiles don't quite reach her eyes. Her hand lingers a second too long on his shoulder after a close call, as if confirming he's solid. He starts to feel protected and shut out in the same breath, and that combination, that changes everything. When they ask, she doubles down on the official story. Too many classes, heavy workload, McGonagall's special permission. She leans on school rules as a shield, reciting schedules and exam dates until Ron's eyes glaze over. The irony is brutal. To protect the secret that she is breaking the timeline, Hermione hides behind the idea that she is only breaking herself for grades. But because she's exhausted, and because secrets erode even the best intentions, the mask slips. One evening in the common room, Harry complains about how close he came to falling off his broom in the last match. Hermione snaps, "Well, at least the Dementors didn't get near you this time," and then freezes. There were no Dementors at that match. Not in this version. Harry and Ron exchange a look that wordless Weasley-Potter conversation that means something is wrong. Hermione backtracks, fast, blaming nightmares, exam stress, anything but the truth. On the surface, the moment passes. Underneath, a new question starts to grow between them. What else has she lived through that they haven't? And what happens when they finally catch her in a lie she can't explain away? Pattern break. What if the time turner never got returned? Hermione decides the answer to that question before the Hogwarts Express has even left the station. Canon gives us a neat little bow. Exams finished, Buckbeak and Sirius gone, time turner dutifully handed back, dangerous magic safely out of reach. But what if that tidy ending is a lie? What if, in this timeline, Hermione looks at the future she's already tasted in shattered, repeated hours and thinks, sending this back would be the real irresponsibility. This isn't a story about a girl addicted to power for its own sake. It's about a girl who has watched a man she believes innocent fly into the night with Dementors still stationed around a school full of children. She knows Sirius is still hunted. She knows the Ministry is still corrupt. She knows Voldemort's shadow is thickening at the edges of the story because she's been paying attention to every whisper in the Daily Prophet. Giving up time travel, to her, means choosing to be helpless the next time the world tips. So she does what Hermione always does when the rules fail to protect the people she loves. She turns to the paperwork. McGonagall summons her at the end of term. The same stern, proud look, the same velvet bag on the desk. In canon, Hermione hands it over. Here, the scene tilts. Hermione has already spent nights in the library reviewing Ministry procedures, tracing how experimental artifacts are logged, renewed, written off. She has copied the original authorization letter, practiced McGonagall's crisp, angular hand until her own quill can almost pass. What if the Ministry believes the time turner was damaged beyond repair during the chaos with the Dementors? What if there's a form for that, a box to tick, a line to initial? There is. Hermione has it ready. She presents McGonagall with a carefully drafted report. The strain of overuse, the risk of temporal instability, her own request to discontinue the arrangement next year. It's plausible, painfully responsible. McGonagall, who has watched this girl fray herself thin for the sake of education and duty, doesn't question it. She signs where Hermione has already marked, trusting, because of course she trusts Hermione Granger. This changes everything, not because the time turner suddenly becomes a shiny superhero gadget, but because it stops being a closed loop from third year and becomes an illicit, long-term option humming quietly in the background of every crisis. Time travel is no longer a one-off plot device. It's contraband in the hands of the one person most likely to use it for everyone else, and least likely to forgive herself when she fails. Pattern interrupt. Imagine jumping ahead to the Department of Mysteries, or to the Horcrux hunt, and realizing she has had this way out all along. For now, though, it's simple. Back in her dormitory, the other girls packing, Hermione takes an old arithmancy textbook and carves a hollow into its pages with a severing charm so precise it feels like sacrilege. The time turner nestles inside, gold against equations about probability and cause. Later, at home, she will add a false bottom to her trunk, a second hiding place under jumpers and essays. She tells herself she'll only use it if absolutely necessary. only if there's truly no other way to protect her family, her friends. This Harry who keeps throwing himself in front of curses. She believes that promise when she makes it. The timeline, listening, already knows she won't keep it. 4th year, second chances. A time-savvy Hermione meets the Triwizard. What if the girl who stepped off the Hogwarts Express in 4th year wasn't just older, but carrying an entire secret year behind her eyes? Hermione returns to Hogwarts with her badge polished, her schedule color-coded, and a ministry time-turner hidden beneath that false bottom. She has essays and ink and neatly folded jumpers in her trunk. She also has memories no one else remembers. Detentions that never happened, arguments she rewound into civil conversations. Near-miss accidents fixed before anyone bled. She's more controlled now, more precise. But because every control freak is, at heart, a catastrophist, she's also more tightly wound than canon ever let us see. So when Dumbledore stands in the Great Hall and announces the Triwizard Tournament, Hermione doesn't just huff at the age restriction. She goes very still. We can imagine her mind moving faster than the enchanted ceiling overhead. How many students died the last time? What are the failure rates of magical safety protocols? What if the Ministry is using this as soft power after the World Cup disaster? This isn't a story about schoolyard jealousy over who gets eternal glory. For Hermione, it's an exercise in risk calculations and contingency plans. The age line around the goblet, to most students, it's a joke. Another clever Dumbledore flourish. To time-savvy Hermione, it reads as an admission. The adults know this is dangerous and are still choosing spectacle. That means she has to choose something else. She's already mapping out evacuation routes in her head, wondering which charms might disrupt a binding magical contract. And in a darker corner of her mind, whether time travel could ever be used to unchoose a champion. And then Harry's name comes out. In canon, she's shocked, then loyal. Here, the reaction fractures into layers. First, raw fear. We've watched her spend an entire hidden year quietly trying to protect her family of choice from a castle that keeps trying to kill them. Then déjà vu, the sick recognition of another life-threatening scenario landing on this Harry who already has a lightning scar and a talent for nearly dying. And beneath both, a cold, terrible thought she hates herself for having. I can fix this if I have to. This changes everything. Not because she suddenly stops loving him, but because love plus foreknowledge turns Hermione from co-adventurer into strategist. While Ron fumes about betrayal and Harry protests his innocence, Hermione is already thinking in timelines, not tasks. One path, where she trusts the judges. Another, where she shadows every task with countercurses. A third, almost unthinkable, where she snaps the chain of the time-turner and risks paradox to pull him out. Group dynamics tilt. Harry is still the one in the arena. Ron is still the one measuring himself against a brotherhood of heroes. But Hermione, she's quietly becoming mission control, building backup plans, instead of just hunting clues. We're watching the smartest witch of her age weigh whether editing a tournament is any different, ethically, from editing a single night in 3rd year. So, let's explore the question hanging over every task. With this much experience of how Rom Hogwarts can go, how far will she go to pre-edit the Triwizard's worst outcomes? And what happens if time finally refuses to be managed? Editing the first task. Fire, dragons, and do-overs. She starts with a chair in the library, a schedule, and the memory of a boy on a broom with a broken arm and no safety net. Canon gives us Hermione shoving books at Harry, drilling the summoning charm until he can accio his firebolt in his sleep. That still happens. The late nights in empty classrooms, the stack of cushions, Harry's nerves fraying as he mutters, "What if I miss?" are all intact. But because this Hermione has already lived through Buckbeak's execution and Sirius's almost kiss with the Dementors more than once, she adds one more step the canon never shows us. She edits the morning. Not the task itself, not the spectacle, the morning. What if she gets up at 6, turns the time turner once, and watches how Hagrid walks them down to see the dragons? What if she notes which handlers linger near which enclosure, who pats their pockets for a spare chain, who absent-mindedly scratches a horntail's snout and doesn't get burned? She can't change the fact that 4 champions will fly against 4 dragons in front of the entire school and a panel of international judges. This isn't a story about Hermione cancelling the first task. It's a story about her shaving off the edges of fate where no one is looking. So she runs dry runs. In one pass, she lets Canon play. She only helps with Accio, only reassures him in the tent. In another, she uses those extra hours to nudge Harry's practice schedule days earlier, pushing him to work on tight turns rather than raw speed, because she's seen how close that tail swipe comes. In a third, she loops back again just to stand in the shadows by the enclosure ropes, memorizing the rhythm of the keeper's movements. The exact second the Horntail's attention flicks from a handler to the egg. Her constraint is brutal and precise. She cannot be seen twice. She cannot alter who gets which dragon, or whether Bagman makes it sound fair. She cannot, without raising every suspicion in the world, suggest some brand new spell that would obviously make the judges ask questions. So her edits are surgical, a reminder for Harry to keep higher to avoid the tail, an extra emphasis on wand grip, so Accio doesn't falter. A pointed comment about wind direction that lodges in his mind at exactly the right moment. And it doesn't always work. In one version, the tail catches him full in the side. She watches from the stands as he slams into the wall, hears the crowd scream, feels her own voice tear her throat. Madame Pomfrey runs. Dumbledore's face goes white. Harry lives, but just barely, and Hermione stands there with the awful knowledge that she could rewind. So she does. She goes back, hands shaking on the time turner, stomach rolling. She makes one more adjustment, then another. In the final timeline, this Harry only gets singed, arm blistered, robes scorched, eyes wide but alive as he clutches the golden egg. When we see her in the stands, she's pale and trembling, and everyone assumes it's fear. It is fear. But it's also vertigo. The shock of having watched her best friend nearly die more than once in the same morning, while everyone else remembers only the safest version. And if this is what she's willing to do for one task, one dragon, one morning, what happens when the maze comes? The Yule Ball, refracted, social life in multiple timelines. The maze is still months away. Before we get there, the war in Hermione's head takes on dress robes and a dance card. Canon gives us a Hermione who dreads the Yule Ball on very ordinary terms. Frizzy hair, big teeth. No one asking her early. The quiet panic of wondering if she will be left on the sidelines while prettier girls whirl past. She worries about tripping, about not knowing how to flirt, about being seen. Now add time travel, because in this timeline, she doesn't just have a dress and a date. She has a rehearsal room built into reality. What if she loops an afternoon to try on different charms for her hair, different shades of periwinkle, different ways of walking down the stairs so she doesn't stumble on the last step? What if she practices smiling at Victor Crumb in 3, 4, 5 separate evenings, rewinding until the greeting feels effortless instead of terrifying? This isn't a story about vanity. It's about control, about a girl who has watched too many things go wrong, deciding that her first real ball will not be one of them. So we have to ask, how far does she take it? Does she answer Crumb's shy invitation one way, see his face fall, and then go back to choose a warmer, braver yes? Does she test versions of Ron's reaction? One where she snaps immediately, one where she stays icily polite, one where she walks away without crying, before settling on the argument that feels most honest and least destructive to the fragile family she's built with these boys. This changes everything. Not because the night becomes perfect, but because the night becomes editable. Conversations stop being single chances and start feeling like scripts. If she can trim the most humiliating lines and reshoot the worst emotional angles, where does sincerity live? Where is the trembling risk that makes a confession real? There's an ethical grayness here that's quieter than saving Buckbeak, but just as profound. Editing the past to rescue a life feels righteous. Editing the past so your crush sees you at your best, that's murkier. When Hermione calibrates her responses for maximum impact, she's protecting herself. But she's also nudging Harry, Ron, and Victor into roles they never consented to rehearse. Vulnerability becomes a calculated variable instead of a leap. And even if she lands on a version of the Yule Ball that looks, from the outside, triumphant, the dress perfect, the dance graceful, the fight with Ron sharp, but survivable, she remembers. She remembers the timeline where she fled to the bathroom and didn't come out for 20 minutes. The one where she said the unforgivable sentence, the one that made Ron's face close off in a way she couldn't immediately fix. Those ghosts dance beside her, unseen partners in every waltz. The ball becomes a metaphor for growing up under a time-turner's shadow. If Hermione can choreograph her own coming of age, first dance, first real jealousy, first moment of being truly seen as beautiful, then is she inhabiting those milestones or directing them from somewhere just outside of time? And when the music ends and the war resumes, which version of herself walks out of the Great Hall, and which versions are left behind, still crying in the corridors of a timeline no one else remembers? Graveyard echoes. Could Hermione have stopped Voldemort's return? And while those unseen versions of Ginny haunt the corridors, Hermione is already looking further ahead, to the maze, the cup, the graveyard. Because once you've walked outside of time, you don't just live the year, you start running probability trees in your head every time someone says the word task. So what actually happens in canon? And what if Hermione walks into it already armed with loops? We know the shape of that night. The third task maze swallowing champions one by one, the cup gleaming at its center, turned into a portkey by Barty Crouch Jr. Cedric and Harry reach it together, a flash of hook behind the navel magic. The graveyard. Kill the spare. Cedric's death, Voldemort's ritual with bone and blood, the circle of Death Eaters, and Harry's impossible escape through Priori Incantatem. It's brutal. It's fixed in our minds. This changes everything. Because Hermione, in this timeline, walks into that maze, already tasting the wrongness. What does she do with that awareness? First, she tries the obvious, human things. She begs Harry not to touch the cup. She pulls Ron and Ginny into quiet corners, running through contingencies. She goes to Dumbledore earlier, voice shaking but precise, laying out patterns, Crouch's behavior, Moody's odd choices, the way danger keeps converging on that final task. This Hermione doesn't shrug and hope the adults have it in hand. She starts asking what if at breakfast. When that isn't enough, she escalates. Preemptive sabotage, quiet hours in the library, hunting for ways to disrupt portkeys, subtle charms worked into Harry's robes that might anchor him to the school grounds. Maybe in one loop, she and Fred and George accidentally destabilize part of the maze's enchantments, forcing the staff to rework the task. It's clever, it's brave. It runs headlong into the limits of her reach. Because this isn't a story about a schoolgirl outwitting one bungling villain. It's a story about a child pushing against adult magic, a Death Eater who fooled Dumbledore, and the weight of prophecy humming under Harry's skin. Barty Crouch Jr. adapts. The cup is checked and rechecked by powerful witches and wizards who never imagine the threat is inside their own staff room. The maze is layered with protections she can't legally even read about yet. The timeline resists the tiny edits. So Hermione makes a more terrible choice. If she can't keep Harry from the cup, maybe she can change who touches it with him. In one loop, she positions herself closer at the end, forcing a tie. Her hand slams into the handle alongside his. The world yanks sideways. Now she is in the graveyard, wand out, heart hammering as Cedric falls and Voldemort rises. And Harry screams her name. She survives, because she has to, because otherwise there is no one to turn the time turner again. She watches the ritual, memorizes every word, every gesture, every Death Eater's mask. She feels the twin cores lock in Priori Incantatem, sees the echo of Lily, of James, of the boy Harry might have been without the Weasleys' love. And then, when they escape, or when she drags him out by sheer stubborn spellwork in some loops we'll never fully see, she rewinds. No one else remembers the smell of graveyard earth in their lungs. No one else wakes up in the hospital wing, already grieving Cedric for the third time. Hermione carries that alone, adjusting her tactics each loop. A different warning here, a slightly altered route through the hedges there. But because the resurrection is anchored to Voldemort's own dark magic and Harry's blood, the core event keeps snapping back, even as details twitch and flicker. She can't stop the return without tearing the year apart at its seams. What she can do is narrow the band of outcomes until one thing is non-negotiable. Harry lives. In every iteration that matters, he makes it back to his family, shaking and furious and alive, while Hermione sits very still and doesn't tell anyone how many dead Harrys she has already refused to accept. And that raises the next, quieter horror. If she is willing to pay that private price once, what line won't she cross in the years to come, when the stakes are higher, the losses sharper, and time itself starts to look less like a rule and more like a weapon she's almost learned to wield? Fifth year, fractured trust. Hermione versus Umbridge, with a time advantage. Umbridge's first hem lands in a Hogwarts where the air is already thin with ghosts only Hermione remembers. To everyone else, she's an odious ministry plant in a pink cardigan. To Hermione, she's something worse. A new variable in a timeline she has been quietly, desperately trying to stabilize since third year. This isn't a story about a bossy prefect who hates injustice. It's a story about a girl who has watched time bend, who has seen one wrong choice echo for years, and who now watches a toad-like woman rewrite the rules of power inside the school that is supposed to protect them. What do you do when you've learned the universe can be nudged, but not safely steered, when you know how fragile canon really is? Hermione looks at Educational Decree number 24 and doesn't just see words, she sees potential fault lines. So she experiments, quietly, carefully, horrifyingly. Maybe in one branch of the week, she answers Umbridge back in defense, pushes harder than Harry does in canon, and watches 3 Hufflepuff first years get brutal detentions as collateral. Reset. In another, she plants a charmed quill in Umbridge's office, testing how far she can go in exposing blood quill torture before Fudge tightens control and threatens Dumbledore directly. Reset. Again and again she probes. How much outrage can Hogwarts show without triggering a crackdown that ends with auras in the corridors and Harry expelled? This changes everything, because by the time we see the real 5th year unfold, Hermione may already have burned through a dozen invisible failures. The apparently spontaneous idea of a secret defense group, that may be version 4. The choice not to meet in empty classrooms, or down by the lake, or in the Shrieking Shack. Those might be sites she has already watched get raided, or watched Cho's friend Marietta panic and run for a teacher, or watched Filch follow a trail she didn't anticipate. In the final cut of the timeline, she discovers the Room of Requirement. But imagine how that discovery feels when you've already held recruitment meetings in the Transfiguration Courtyard and seen them end in detentions. When you've tried a rotating schedule of locations and still lost Neville to a hallway ambush. The room is not just convenient. To Hermione, it is the first solution that doesn't end in immediate disaster. And inside that room, the leadership fracture begins. Harry is the heart, the symbol, the one who can say, "I fought him," and make a room full of terrified teenagers believe they can too. But because Hermione has run so many versions of these nights, she becomes something else. The architect in the walls. She nudges the order of spells they learn, because she's already seen which curses Umbridge's inquisitorial squad favors. She insists on secrecy, oaths and contingency plans that feel paranoid to kids who've only lived each day once. At what point does Harry notice that she's not just being careful, she's being certain? When she shuts down his impulse to recruit a few more Gryffindors with a flat, "No, it's too risky," and can't explain why. When she knows, before it happens, that Marietta is the weak link and designs protections that feel eerily targeted. When she looks at him after one narrow escape from Umbridge's office, with an expression that doesn't match the night they just lived. Because in her head, this is the third time she's watched him almost get caught. This Harry raised in a family that prizes honesty, starts to ask the obvious question, what does she know that she won't tell him? And once that question settles between them, once love and loyalty collide with the suspicion that Hermione is playing a longer game in a timeline only she can see, we have to ask our own, how long can a friendship bear secrets written into the bones of reality itself? Detention on repeat, breaking and re-breaking under Umbridge. Hermione's first detention with Umbridge is where the time travel stops feeling clever and starts feeling like a weapon she can turn on herself. She sits, small and straight-backed, in that frilly pink office that smells of kittens and cruelty, and writes, I must not tell lies. The quill bites. No ink. Just blood. You remember Canon Harry's shock, the way he stares at the words etching into his skin. But because this Hermione has already rewound nights to save Buckbeak, already watched herself across a courtyard, she understands something immediately. Pain can be redirected. What if she could make sure it lands on her? The horror comes first. The instinct follows a heartbeat later. She looks at her hand, at the sentence blooming there in raw, wet lines. And somewhere behind the fear, another thought arrives. Third years, second years, tiny first years with shaking voices in defense. What happens when one of them talks back? What happens when Umbridge smiles and says, detention? This isn't a story about Hermione outsmarting a cruel teacher once. This is a story about her deciding, quietly, that if the timeline is going to demand blood, it will be hers. So the evenings start to loop. In one version, a Hufflepuff boy mutters about how this doesn't feel like real defense and earns himself a sweet, poisonous smile. Detention, Mr. Abbott. Hermione's stomach drops. She serves her own hours that night. Then, when the castle has gone dark and the pain in her hand is a steady throb, she turns the time turner. 3 hours back, corridor outside Umbridge's classroom. She waits, intercepts him as he comes out, hisses, "Please, just don't say anything today." And when he looks confused, she steps inside early, answers too sharply, makes herself the one who gets assigned. Loop after loop, she does this. A Ravenclaw girl who questions the Ministry's stance on Voldemort. A Gryffindor second year who laughs at the wrong moment. Each time, Hermione adjusts the angle of the evening. Each time, Umbridge's toad-like eyes settle on her instead. Detention, Miss Granger. This changes everything, because the scars don't line up neatly anymore. On the back of her hand, there is one sentence the others can see, but in her memory, there are dozens. Slightly different nights, slightly different cruelties. The same chair, the same ticking plates on the wall, the same slow realization that she has written "I must not tell lies" so many times that the words no longer feel connected to truth at all. And no one knows. To Harry and Ron, this Hermione is just more tired, more brittle, more buried in schedules. She snaps when they're late. She disappears to the library on evenings when, from her perspective, she has already lived 3 extra hours and bled through 2 handkerchiefs. They see the scar once, wince, rage on her behalf. They don't see the layered versions of that mark, The way her mind now holds multiple copies of the same night, stacked like pages in a book only she can read. So, let's explore the moment that illusion finally cracks. It's late, after yet another rewound detention. The dormitory is quiet. Hermione stands in front of the mirror in the girls' bathroom, hand under the harsh, enchanted light. On the skin, one sentence: "I must not tell lies." But as she stares, exhausted and slightly unmoored from linear time, she sees more. Ghost phrases, half-remembered iterations, the echo of every looped evening crowding the same narrow space. She flexes her fingers, and, for a second, it feels like her hand doesn't quite belong to this timeline at all. If the scars can multiply in memory, what else can? And when the next decree comes down, when Umbridge's power tightens again, what will Hermione be willing to rewind this time? And who will notice that the girl they love is cracking along lines no one else can see? The prophecy and the paradox. Why Hermione can't just fix everything. There's a moment, right after that stutter in reality, when Hermione understands something terrifying. The problem isn't that she can't change anything. The problem is that she can change just enough. What if time isn't a blank page she can rewrite, but a stubborn manuscript that only lets her scribble in the margins? What if every line about Voldemort, about Harry, about the prophecy, is written in a kind of magical ink that bleeds back through no matter how often she scratches it out? This isn't a story about Hermione discovering a cheat code and speedrunning the war. It's a story about her discovering fixed points. Some events have too much weight in the fabric of the timeline. The Halloween attack, the Horcrux in Harry's scar, Trelawney's prophecy binding Voldemort, and the boy who lived. In this world, those aren't just plot beats, they're anchors. You can nudge the ripples around them. You can't lift the stone. Canon quietly hints at this. The time turner in third year doesn't create a new future. It completes a loop that was always there. Buckbeak always escaped. The rock always hit Harry's head. Dumbledore always looked out the window because he'd already heard the wolf's howl. This changes everything for Hermione's understanding of power, because if the past already contains her future interference, then fixing things on a grand scale might mean fighting the castle itself. And the magic pushes back. Rowling destroyed every time-turner in the Department of Mysteries for a reason. In universe, the official line is an accident. But because Hermione has been using hers beyond schoolwork for years, she's seen how fragile that official story is. The sand runs strangely thin if she jumps too far. Charms misfire around her when she's overlapped with herself too many times in one day. Once, sprinting through a corridor to beat her own footsteps to a staircase, she turns a corner, and there she is. Her own sleeve, brushing her own wrist. Reality shivers. The torches flicker in perfect unison. For half a heartbeat, she can't remember which Hermione is older. She jerks back, obeys McGonagall's warning with the kind of bone-deep fear no rulebook could inspire, and spends the rest of the night shaking. Catastrophic paradox stops being an abstract term in a ministry pamphlet and becomes the thing that almost unmade her. So she starts writing rules. Not the tidy school rules she used to quote at Harry and Ron, but harsher ones. She can redistribute pain, move someone out of the hallway before a curse hits, take detention instead of Neville, shift which Weasley ends up in the hospital wing. She can delay deaths, slow a hex, reroute a patrol, buy Remus or Tonks or Fred an extra week, an extra day, an extra breath. She can soften blows, change who knows what and when, but she can't delete the war. Every time she tries to push earlier, to cut out a root instead of trimming a branch, the timeline snarls. Prophecies don't vanish. They reassert themselves in uglier ways. Voldemort doesn't fail to rise. He rises through someone else, somewhere else, with collateral she can't predict. And that becomes the quiet tragedy of this Hermione. The more she learns about time, the more precise her map of what cannot be altered becomes. She knows, with horrifying clarity, which funerals are movable and which are fixed, which scars are negotiable and which are written into Harry's skin. This Harry she loves as family, can be protected from a corridor, from a curse, from a choice on a Tuesday afternoon. He can't be protected from being the boy in the prophecy. So, let's explore what that knowledge does to her, and what happens the first time Harry and Ron realize that the girl at their side has already watched them die in timelines they will never remember. The Department of Mysteries, replayed, saving Sirius again and again. She knows how he falls, not just in the abstract, not as a line in a history book, but as a looping, sickening image that has lived behind her eyelids since third year. Sirius, laughing in the middle of a duel, tipping backward through a fluttering curtain. Harry's scream tearing the air. This isn't a story about discovering that death exists. It's about watching the same man die twice in the same war and wondering how many times the timeline can bear it. So when the Department of Mysteries looms on the horizon, Hermione is already afraid in a way Harry and Ron can't name. She's lost Sirius once in canon. She's lost him again in a version of events only she remembers, where a mistimed, stunning spell or a misjudged sprint down a corridor meant he didn't make it to the firebolt in time. What if this is the moment she was given the time turner for? Not arithmancy, not extra homework. This. Her first strategy is simple. Don't let them go. She warns Harry more forcefully, pushing harder than in the original timeline, demanding proof, demanding they verify the vision, dragging him to Dumbledore's office again and again. When that fails, because of course it fails, because Voldemort is building traps out of Harry's love, she starts looping the day itself. 10 minutes back to forget to return the DA coin, an hour back to engineer a detention that keeps Harry at Hogwarts longer. A whole afternoon rewound to make sure Snape gets the message in the corridor. Each loop buys time. None of them buy safety. By the time they reach the Hall of Prophecy, the battle has become a temporal maze that only Hermione can see. This changes everything about how she moves. She's seen Neville's nose break. She shifts him a step to the left. She knows when the shelves will topple. She yanks Ginny clear seconds earlier. In one iteration, she shouts, "Duck!" before a Death Eater even raises his wand. And Ron just stares. But he ducks anyway. The DA members are less injured, less scattered. She is more exhausted, more precise, more terrified. Because there is one variable she cannot solve for. Sirius. In every loop he arrives like a storm. Reckless, radiant, delighted to be fighting for his godson in the open at last. This Harry, This Harry who grew up a Weasley surges toward him with that same open joy, and Hermione can feel the future tightening around them. She tries everything, positioning Sirius behind Kingsley, shoving him toward Remus, interposing herself between him and Bellatrix. She changes which spells she shouts, which curses she blocks, which Death Eater she targets first. Minor variations. No true escape. Sometimes Bellatrix taunts first. Sometimes it's a red jet of light. Sometimes a sickly purple. Sometimes he stumbles before the veil. Sometimes he spins. But because his instinct is always to protect Harry, because Bellatrix's instinct is always to aim for the person Harry loves most, and because the veil is always there, humming with a pull older than any time turner, the moment converges. He falls. Again. Hermione drags herself through one last loop, hands shaking as she rewinds the same hour she has already lived more times than she can count. She makes the perfect sequence of moves, every friend shielded, every spell anticipated, every angle calculated. Sirius still dies. The universe, it seems, is not a homework essay she can edit into perfection without tearing the parchment. When the battle ends and Harry's sobs echo against the cold stone, Hermione slips into a side chamber of the Department of Mysteries and collapses, time turner cold against her palm. Some losses, she realizes, are woven so tightly into this war that to unpick them would unravel everything. Harry's choices, Voldemort's downfall, the fragile path to peace. And as the clocks in the Hall of Time tick on, she has to decide what she's willing to break next, the rules of reality or her own heart. Pattern break. The night the time turner shatters. The decision is made for her in a single, shattering heartbeat. Hermione is on the floor of the time chamber when it happens, knees bruised, lungs burning, Harry's shout and Bellatrix's laughter echoing down the corridor. Glass planets swing overhead, time in orbits and droplets and ticking brass. She reaches for her time turner, her constant, her weapon, her sin. And in canon, this is where all the Ministry's devices are destroyed at a distance, neat and impersonal. But because this is her story, the destruction lands in her hands. A curse misses Harry by inches. It hits the rack of hourglasses instead. One explodes in a spray of molten sand and warped time, and a single shard scythes down, catching the delicate glass of Hermione's time turner as she raises it in a last, desperate reflex. She means to flip it, to buy them one more chance, one more loop, one more improbable escape. The chain snaps. The hourglass cracks. For a moment there is no sound at all, only a pressure, a wrongness building in her palm. Then the world detonates in silence. Not light, not sound. A shockwave of before and after slamming through her body. Every hour she has stolen, every class doubled, every mission replayed, every secret timeline she's lived alone, rushes back at her in one impossible instant. This isn't a story about a tidy Ministry memo saying, "All time turners destroyed." This is a girl in the Hall of Time, choking on the taste of 100 might-have-beens as they fracture behind her eyes. She sees Buckbeak dying, Buckbeak living, Sirius falling through the veil, Sirius escaping on a hippogriff, Harry bleeding in a graveyard he never reached, Harry laughing at breakfast on mornings she silently rewrote. She sees herself arguing with McGonagall about responsibility, with Dumbledore about risk, with a mirror about what she is becoming. Timelines flash like lightning. Some are familiar, some are wrong in small, intimate ways. A different word in an argument with Ron, a different book chosen in first year, a different hand not held in the hospital wing. Then it stops. The time chamber is just a room again. The clocks tick. The planets swing. The broken time turner lies in her fist, glass spiderwebbed, sand frozen mid-fall. And for the first time since third year, the world is terrifyingly, brutally linear. No more rewinds, no more secret second chances, no more private bargains with causality. This changes everything. Because Hermione has been growing up in sideways hours. She has lived days inside days, carried exhaustion no one else could see, made choices knowing she could, in theory, unmake them. She has become someone who calculates futures the way other people do homework. Who is she when time stops answering her? She staggers to her feet, disoriented, feeling older than 15 and younger than the girl who thought she could fix anything if you just went back far enough. The habits are still there. The instinct to catalogue, to plan, to reach for the hourglass that is now dead weight. The memories are still there too, layered and conflicting. A private archive of versions no one else remembers. So what does it mean to protect your family, your friends, your Harry, when you can't rewind a single second? Without the safety net, without the God's eye view of looping time, who is Hermione Granger allowed to be? A strategist, a martyr, a girl who finally accepts that some losses must stand. So, let's explore the moment she realizes the future is no longer a puzzle to be reworked, but a road she can only walk once, and how that shapes every choice she makes from here on. 6th year without a reset button. Grief, guilt, and growing up. Hermione's 6th year doesn't open with mystery ink or a shiny badge. It opens with absence. No ticking hourglass under her robes, no quiet weight against her collarbone, no emergency exit humming at the edge of her awareness. She is grieving 2 losses at once, and the grief knots together until she can't quite separate it. Sirius, who fell through a veil she couldn't decode in time, the time turner, which shattered on the Department of Mysteries floor, taking with it every hypothetical second chance. What if she'd had one more turn, one more loop, one more attempt to drag Harry back from the edge of that archway? This isn't a story about rational guilt. It's about the kind that latches on because you were powerful once and failed anyway. This changes everything in her relationship with Harry, not because she loves him less, but because love with no reset button is terrifying. She becomes sharper about safety, fussier about plans, almost parental in the way she watches him during Quidditch practice or late-night map consultations. And every so often, something slips. A flinch when he mentions the Ministry. A half-finished sentence, if we'd gone left instead of, that she has to swallow before she references an outcome that only exists in her private catalogue of might-have-beens. Harry notices the protectiveness before he understands the grief beneath it. So when the Half-Blood Prince's book appears, we understand why it doesn't read as clever to Hermione. It reads as a trap. She's seen what hidden knowledge without context can do. A girl with a time turner pushing herself past exhaustion, because the timetable said it was possible. A handful of teenagers in the Department of Mysteries, armed with fragments of prophecy and no real briefing. To her, the annotated textbook is just another seductive shortcut, another promise that you can skip the slow work and still protect everyone you love. She watches Harry carve success out of its margins and feels something close to panic, because she knows how easily power without a full timeline can backfire. Without time travel, her ethics have to grow up. Before, mistakes were moral puzzles. Could she, should she, go back and fix them? Now, they're scars, permanent, instructive, sometimes ugly. She throws herself into prevention, founding a more structured DA, pressing teachers with pointed questions, annotating her own books with warnings instead of secret spells. If she can't rewind, she can at least make sure the first run-through is as informed as possible. Education becomes her new time-turner. And then, one cold night, she stands at a tower window and watches Dumbledore and Harry leave the castle. Two cloaked figures shrinking against the dark. Every nerve in her body screams for a do-over, an extra hour, any way to stand between them and whatever waits beyond the wards. Her hand goes automatically to her throat. There is nothing there. No chain, no sand, just the knowledge that this road will only be walked once, and she will have to live with where it ends. Dumbledore's death in a world where Hermione knows too much. Her hand closes on empty air, and in that absence, the future snaps shut. By the time the green light stains the sky above the astronomy tower, Hermione has already rehearsed this moment in nightmares she never lived, but remembers anyway. What if she'd had one more hour, one more loop, one more impossible chance to drag Dumbledore away from the edge? She isn't there when Snape raises his wand. That's important. This isn't a story about Hermione flinging herself between headmaster and killing curse. It's a story about someone who has spent years quietly propping up the adults in the room, only to discover that some of them are walking toward their deaths with their eyes open. When the news comes, broken, stuttering, passed from terrified first year to shell-shocked prefect, Hermione doesn't react the way canon expects. She doesn't deny, or bargain, or shout that there must be a mistake. She goes very, very still, because in her bones she recognizes the shape of a fixed point. It feels like the hospital wing again, or the shore of the lake with a dying Sirius just out of reach. One of those nights, time itself has already made up its mind. Once, 13-year-old Hermione believed that enough cleverness and enough sand in a glass could fix almost anything. Buckbeak, Sirius, even her own overstuffed timetable. But because she has lived through the nausea of reliving hours, the way reality frays when you push too hard, she now understands the difference between an accident you can correct and a sacrifice someone chooses. Dumbledore's blackened hand, the way he looked at Harry over the ring, the calm with which he spoke about another man's soul on the astronomy tower steps, those are not the tells of a man expecting rescue. So what does it mean to watch a mentor die you might once have tried to save? For Hermione, it means the last illusion falls. There is no older generation waiting in the wings. No McGonagall who will quietly fix what the children break. No omniscient headmaster steering the timeline back on course. This changes everything. Not because Dumbledore was perfect, but because his absence shoves Hermione, Harry, and Ron into the space he used to occupy. Her role shifts overnight. She stops mentally drafting contingency plans that hinge on "and then we tell Dumbledore." Instead, she starts building plans that assume no one is coming. We feel it in the way she approaches the Horcrux hunt. Inventories of possible hiding places, cross-referenced research on soul magic, backup identities and escape routes that would make any Auror proud. She isn't just the SWAT with a beaded bag. She's a strategist who remembers what happens when you gamble on saving everyone and lose. And under all of that is a harder question. If Dumbledore's death is another fixed point, what else is the timeline refusing to surrender? When she looks at Harry now, at this Harry who has already watched too many people fall, does she see a boy she can protect? Or the next sacrifice history is quietly demanding? The answer to that will decide how far she's willing to go next, and whose fate she's prepared to rewrite or leave untouched. The Horcrux hunt, a strategist forged in multiple timelines. Hermione enters the Horcrux hunt, moving differently through the world, and Harry and Ron can feel it even if they can't name it. She counts exits, weighs outcomes, and when she zips that beaded bag shut in the middle of the burrow's chaos, you're watching a strategist forged in timelines no one else remembers. Hermione's heroism in this altered timeline is the opposite angle of the same blade. She isn't improvising. She's anticipating. She isn't leaping because there's nothing to lose. She's holding back because there is so much to lose. When she rewinds an hour to move Lupin a few crucial feet from the Homping Willow, or stays up all night charting which sequence of classes keeps Harry furthest from Malfoy's hexes, her courage is made of foresight, planning, and painful restraint. She knows exactly how bad it can get, and she walks back into it anyway. This changes everything about how we read courage. We're used to thinking of bravery as that first, wild decision to run toward the scream. But what if courage, in this timeline, means choosing the same hallway, the same argument, the same full moon, over and over, carrying every memory of how it went wrong last time? What if the real hero isn't the one who doesn't know the odds, but the one who has counted them, buried the bodies in 3 other versions of the day, and still whispers, again? Underneath both versions, though, is the same engine, love and belonging. Canon Harry throws himself in front of curses because he is desperate to protect the first people who ever felt like family. Here, Hermione throws herself in front of time itself because she is terrified of losing that family she's finally found. Harry's need for connection drives his bravery. Hermione's fear of losing those connections drives her edits. 2 different wounds, the same ache. And crucially, this isn't a story about a lone time goddess puppeteering idiots. Her work only matters because, in the present she shapes, Harry still decides to follow the Patronus into the dark. Ron still chooses to go back for the chessboard, for the locket, for Harry himself. Ginny still walks into the chamber. The Weasleys still stand their ground at the burrow. Hermione can tilt the board, but she cannot move their pieces for them. Pattern interrupt. Imagine a version of this, AU, where she tries. Suddenly, it stops being heroism and starts being control. That's the line she keeps dancing on. Collective heroism means her invisible labor exists to make other people's choices possible, not to erase them. The wards she nudges Dumbledore to strengthen, the extra DA meetings she engineers, the quiet conversations that keep Percy from walking out quite so early. None of those win the war alone. They just keep people alive long enough to become legends. So, let's explore heroism here as something unglamorous. Less prophecy, more project management. Less glory, more grim, unthanked maintenance of a fragile, better timeline. The boy who lived still has to live it. She just makes sure he gets the chance. A world built on second chances, emotional payoffs of the AU. And here's where the AU slips from strategy into something softer, stranger, and much more human. Because when you give Hermione Granger the power to sand down the sharpest edges of canon, you're not just rewriting plot, you're rewriting how it feels to live through this war. On the surface, it is absolute wish fulfillment. Who among us hasn't wanted to reach back through the timeline and say, "Not that corridor, not that night, don't go alone"? In this version, someone actually can. Someone competent, meticulous, and almost pathologically unwilling to let people she loves be collateral damage. The fantasy here is simple and devastating. That a girl with a timetable and a spine of steel could quietly catch the worst blows before they land. This changes everything emotionally, but it doesn't make it easy. Every second chance has a cost, and in this story, the bill is addressed to Hermione alone. For Ron and Harry, the Buckbeak rescue is a daring success. For Sirius, the escape is a miracle. For Hermione, it is the third or fifth or 12th attempt, layered over nights where she watched it fail. This isn't a story about effortless fixing. It's a story about someone who pays in extra hours of fear, pain, and loneliness that only she remembers. Think about the specific payoffs. Sirius, who in canon dies still half feral from Azkaban, gets a Hermione who has already rehearsed how to reach him without triggering his worst instincts. Maybe she tweaks which memories Harry brings up, or where they stand in that shrieking shack confrontation, until she finds the version where Sirius walks out a little less shattered. The DA, instead of stumbling into ambush after ambush, trains with someone who has already seen which spells they'll wish they knew. This Harry survives the Department of Mysteries with one less broken bone, one less senseless humiliation, one less random trauma that never quite heals. And then there are the small mercies, the ones that never make it into prophecy. A Quidditch fall that doesn't happen because she moved a practice. A cruel remark from Snape that lands on her instead of on Neville because she knows exactly when it's coming. A friendship with Ron that doesn't fracture so deeply in fourth year because she's already lived through the worst version and learned which sentence not to say. None of these win the war. They just keep hearts intact long enough to keep fighting. So, let's explore this AU as a quiet love letter to Hermione herself. Given the chance to play God, she chooses to play Guardian. She doesn't use time to dominate, to hoard credit, to become untouchable. She uses it to protect, to redistribute pain, to make sure the people she calls family get to grow up. It means the comfort here is never pure fluff. It's catharsis built on sacrifice, a better world balanced on one girl's exhausted shoulders, asking us whether we'd let her put it down. And of course, the question hanging over all of this is simple and terrifying. How long can one person carry that alone before the timeline pushes back? The limits of control, learning to let time move forward. At some point, the question stops being how long can she carry it, and quietly shifts into something sharper. What if she puts it down and someone dies? That's the trap Hermione walks into when she goes back alone. Not a villain's curse, a sense of responsibility sharpened into obsession. Because if we trace her through this timeline, we watch a very specific evolution. She begins as the girl who believes there is a right answer to everything. If you just read enough, plan enough, work hard enough. Miss every class, use a time turner, fall behind, add another schedule, another color-coded revision chart. Someone's in danger, go back 3 hours and fix it. This isn't a story about arrogance at first. It's about faith in effort. But the timeline does not care about her homework ethic. Sirius is where that lesson lands like a blow. In canon, his death is already a brutal reminder that you can't revise grief away. Here, Hermione has tasted what it means to rewind the clock and still lose him. She has already watched him escape once, already bent time until it screamed, and yet, in the Department of Mysteries, he still falls. She can run the numbers, replay the duel in her head, imagine a dozen micro-adjustments. She cannot reach him. This changes everything, not because she suddenly stops trying, but because she finally runs into a problem that will not yield to intelligence or repetition. The shattering of the time turner in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries isn't just a plot device. It's a symbolic confiscation of her illusion of control. 1 second, she is the girl who can be in 2 places at once. The next, she is one body in one moment, bleeding on the floor like everyone else. Pattern interrupt. Imagine McGonagall's hand steady on her shoulder after the battle, saying, "Miss Granger, there will be no replacement, no lecture, no secret new device, just absence, a hard stop." From there, Dumbledore's chosen sacrifice after the tower deepens the lesson. In this altered timeline, Hermione has more experience with alternate outcomes than anyone. She can see, more clearly than the boys, all the theoretical branches where Dumbledore might have lived. He chooses not to. He walks into a death he could, in her mind, have avoided. What do you do when the person you respect most demonstrates deliberately that sometimes the right move is not to save yourself? The confession in the tent during the Horcrux hunt is the final turn. When she admits to Harry and Ron how many nights she went back, how many silent edits she made to their lives, the cost becomes relational, not just magical. Trust fractures, leadership shifts, and Hermione, who went back in time to protect her family, has to face that love can't thrive under constant revision. So what does maturity look like for someone who has actually had the chance we all fantasize about? We replay conversations in the shower, rewrite years in our heads, imagine the perfect comeback, the perfect rescue. Hermione has lived the fantasy. She has held the lever on the timeline, and she walks away. Her eventual decision to live in real time, with real mistakes, with arguments that aren't optimized, with losses that stay losses, isn't resignation. It's courage. It means choosing presence over perfection. It means grieving instead of editing. And that's where the power shifts. True power, in this version of the story, is no longer about controlling every outcome. It's about what you do when you can't, how you show up when the time turner is gone, The clock is moving forward, and all you have left is your next choice, which raises one last dangerous possibility. If Hermione has learned to let time move, what does she do when someone else tries to seize it? If you remember only one thing about this AU, if you remember only one thing from this entire what if, let it be this. A 13-year-old girl quietly becomes the custodian of time so that the people she loves don't die. Not the smartest witch of her age, not the walking encyclopedia. A child standing in a hospital wing, making a choice no adult should have to make. Then making it again and again across an entire timeline. Only she remembers. This changes everything, because once you see Hermione that way, you can't unsee her. At the heart of this AU is a single tension, pulled tight as a time-turner chain around her throat. The comfort of second chances versus the loneliness of being the only one who remembers the first. Imagine waking up after Buckbeak's rescue, after you've watched Lupin almost kill your best friend and then watched yourself prevent it. Everyone else remembers one night. You remember 3. Which version of you do they think they're talking to at breakfast? Which version do you talk to in the mirror? This isn't a story about flashy paradoxes or clever plot loopholes. It's about how Hermione's greatest strength, her ferocious sense of responsibility, curdles into a private burden when you give her the power to rewind. Of course, she uses the time turner for extra classes. Of course, she uses it to protect Harry, to protect Ron, to protect the fragile, found family she's still growing up inside. But because she can fix almost anything, she slowly decides she must. The line between "I'll help" and "I'll handle it" erodes hour by repeated hour. And the thing is, canon already points us here. Even without literal time travel, Hermione behaves like someone trying to carry the world alone. She's the one who brews Polyjuice in second year, organizes Dumbledore's army in 5th, researches Horcruxes in 7th. She's the one who erases her parents' memories to keep them safe. Give that girl a legal time turner and a war, and all this AU really does is make the invisible visible. The frantic overscheduling becomes actual double days. The guilt becomes alternate outcomes. Only she recalls. So if you hold on to a single image, make it this: Hermione, older than her years, standing somewhere quiet. Maybe the Hogwarts clock tower, maybe a Muggle street far from canon. Palms open, finally putting the time turner down. Not because every danger is gone, not because she's stopped wanting to protect everyone, but because she chooses, once, to step into a future she cannot edit, a future where her friends walk beside her instead of behind her in a loop she controls. What does it mean when the girl who could rewrite the past decides to live with it instead? And if she does, who reaches for time next? Your turn. How would you rewrite Hermione's night? So now it's your turn in the time turner harness. If Hermione stands in that hospital wing and keeps her hand at her side, what do you have her do next? Does she still obey the hint in Dumbledore's eyes? Or does she look at the hourglass, look at Harry, and decide that this time she goes alone for real? Do you send her straight back to the edge of the Forbidden Forest to pull Buckbeak out from under the axe again, but smarter, earlier, with a plan that doesn't rely on last-second heroics? Or do you jump further, break away from Prisoner of Azkaban entirely, and drop a time-hardened Hermione into the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, wand already raised between Harry and Voldemort. What if she walks into the Department of Mysteries with days of practice runs behind her, having already watched the battle go wrong 3 times and refused to accept Sirius falling through the veil? Or maybe you're more interested in the smaller fractures. The night she wipes her parents' memories. The first time she sees Neville's injuries after a detention with Umbridge. The argument in the tent where Ron leaves. Which moment do you most want her to revisit? Not because it changes the whole war, but because it changes what it means for her to be Hermione Granger, growing up with the knowledge that she could have done something differently. Tell us in the comments, if you had one loop to give her, where in the timeline do you drop it? Do you let her take Harry with her and restore the original trio dynamic? Or do you double down on the isolation and have her refuse to tell anyone, even when it hurts? Do you have her push harder against fate, trying over and over until reality itself feels thin? Or do you write the version where she finally, deliberately, puts the time turner down? This isn't a story about getting the right answer. This is a story about what your version of Hermione believes she owes to her friends, to the dead, and to herself. So if this episode has you itching to go deeper, we'd love to see what you build from it. Fanfics that trace her through 20 loops of the same night. Art that layers multiple Hermiones in the same frame. Headcanons where she sits down with McGonagall or Harry or Ginny and finally tells someone everything. Pattern interrupt. Because here's the challenge. Try writing or sketching one scene where she doesn't fix it, where she chooses to protect her own future instead of Canon's past. What changes for her then? This changes everything. Not because time itself bends differently, but because you're deciding what kind of love, what kind of family she is fighting for. So, let's explore together. This channel will keep returning to these deep dive AUs, to versions of Hermione, Harry, and the rest who are treated with the same mix of respect, speculation, and emotional nuance. We can't turn back our own clocks, but we can choose how we tell the stories of the time we've had and which what-ifs we hold close. But there's one last door we haven't quite touched, and it's the one that refuses to stop creaking in the back of your mind. What if, years after the war, in some forgotten Hogwarts cupboard or ministry evidence vault, one time turner survived, and Hermione Granger found it. Not 13-year-old Hermione, desperate to make every class and save every creature. Not battle year Hermione, hollow-eyed and running on adrenaline. An older Hermione, war-worn, war-tired, standing in a quiet room with a familiar hourglass in her palm and no one else there to tell her what to do. What does that moment mean for her? For this timeline she bled to protect. This isn't a story about easy temptation. Hermione has lived the consequences of time already. The way one extra hour can spiral into 3 lives saved and a lifetime of what-ifs. She knows that if she winds that chain around her neck again, she isn't just revisiting memories. She's risking reopening wounds she barely survived the first time. So does she use it? Maybe the first answer, the one she gives herself in the mirror, is a hard no. No, because she's seen how fragile cause and effect really are. No, because she has children now, or students, or a ministry department depending on her. And any change she makes to spare her younger self pain might erase the people who only exist because she endured it. This Harry who grew up loved, might vanish if she meddles with the night Dumbledore left a baby on a doorstep. This changes everything, and she knows it. But because she's Hermione, the questions don't stop. What if she could go back only to watch, not to interfere, stand in the shadows of the hospital wing and finally see her 13-year-old self, and Sirius and Buckbeak from the outside, closing a loop that still wakes her at night? What if she could spend 1 hour with Lupin before the Battle of Hogwarts? Or warn Dobby away from Malfoy Manor? Or whisper one extra hint about Horcruxes in a dusty library aisle? Maybe the most Hermione answer is a single, carefully chosen use that isn't about her at all. Not to save her own sanity, but to give someone else a sliver of peace. A message slipped to McGonagall that saves one unnamed student, a nudge that keeps Arthur out of the way of one more curse. Or maybe her growth means she doesn't even take that. She closes her hand around the time turner, feels the familiar weight of possibility, and then sets it back down. Because some doors, once closed, should stay closed, even when we know exactly how to open them. And there's a quiet heroism in that refusal, in choosing to live with the imperfect, painful, beloved timeline you have. So, let's explore one last image together. Older Hermione in a dust-moted room, the golden chain catching the light, her thumb on the glass. Does she walk away, or does she whisper one last spell? And if she does, whose story changes next? Outro. Staying in this timeline together. Maybe that's the real question this leaves us with, isn't it? Not just whether she walks away from the time turner, but what we do with the timelines we can't rewind, and the people we keep meeting in them. If you've stayed with this long, time-twisting journey, thank you. This was not a quick, what if Hermione used the time turner more thought experiment. This was hours of following one girl through branching nights and collapsing possibilities, of watching her grow up, under the weight of knowing she could have done something differently. You chose to sit in that with her, to trace every fracture line. And that means more than you think. Because this isn't a story about fixing canon for efficiency. This isn't a story about turning Hermione into a flawless temporal goddess who always pulls the right lever. This changes everything only in the sense that it lets us tilt the lens just a fraction. And ask what happens when the brightest witch of her age is also a 13-year-old who can't sleep because she remembers 3 versions of the same argument. That's what this channel is for. To take the stories and characters we love, hold them up to the light, and turn them 1 degree at a time until new emotional truths start to show. Not to erase what's on the page, but to sit beside it and say, what if this choice had gone differently? What if the same girl, the same boy, the same family had to grow up under a slightly altered sky? If you want more of that, more slow burn, essayistic what-if deep dives instead of quick, surface-level takes, this is the moment to tell the algorithm that this timeline matters to you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next fracture. Like the video if following Hermione's secret loops gave you something new to feel about her. Share it with the one friend who still argues about time turner rules at 3 in the morning. And then, help decide where we go next. Should we follow a different night in the hospital wing? A different hand on a different wand in the Department of Mysteries? What if it's not Hermione at all next time, but Ginny in the chamber? Or Neville on the astronomy tower? Or Molly Weasley the night she reads about a baby left on a doorstep? Whose story do you want to tilt? And at which decision point does your heart quietly say, there? Because this Harry of alternate timelines and fragile do-overs, reminds us of something simple. We don't get time turners. We get one pass through each conversation, one chance to decide whether we protect or wound, one opportunity to imagine that the person in front of us is carrying more than they're saying. So we practice here, on stories. We imagine Hermione kinder to herself, Snape braver a day earlier, Dumbledore less alone in his planning. And then we close the book or the tab, and we walk back into a world where the timeline doesn't loop, but our choices still echo. If that's a journey you want to keep making together, stay. Comment your next what if. Subscribe so you're here when we open the next door. We may not be able to rewind, but we can pay attention. We can treat each other carefully in the one fragile, beloved timeline we share. And we can keep imagining generously until the stories we tell about others teach us how to live with them.